Well, David, it's episode 12 of Rebuilding the Black Family.
Crazy.
I'm so glad that we've, started this journey together.
Agreed.
And today we're going to look at the importance of Black unity.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's something very dear to your heart
Yes.
and mine, of course.
Yes.
But before we get into that, I wanted to, because it's the last episode of the season and thinking about that and some of the things that we were discussing back and forth,
Yeah.
I thought to go back to looking at some of the things by which we, in laying the groundwork for this podcast.
Agreed.
And one of the things was the premise.
Yes.
And one of the things we laid out from the outset was our premise was this. If
Yeah.
we don't build our own families, our own communities, no one else will.
Excellent.
And then we also said as a second premise that strong, productive, successful, sustainable Black families will lead to a stronger community at large.
Agreed.
And we said that rebuilding the Black family, that what we're about is changing the foundation of how we see ourselves and one another.
Yes.
And we'll get into some of the things we've looked at over the season. But also I wanted to look at, we also articulated our purpose. And that is we wanted to communicate truths and principles essential to building strong, productive, successful families and self-sufficient communities.
Yes.
We also wanted to provide an accurate representation of Black history. We wanted to be a podcast that informs, that educates, that inspires the Black family and the Black nation, if you will, and to promote self-governance and self-sufficiency. And I think that's in looking back at some of the things, and you've done an excellent job in your input and content. And I wanted to look
Likewise
back
with yourself.
Well, thank you.
Yes,
But I
you're
also,
welcome.
but I wanted to make sure in evaluating what we've done is going back and looking at our premise, looking at what the purpose was, and to grade ourselves, and hopefully our viewers and listeners to this podcast, which we really appreciate you, by the way, that you're able to look and say, well, have David and Carl, have they been true to what they stated was their premise,
Yes.
their purpose, the reason for this podcast? And so, David, if you don't mind, can you maybe just review for us, the different titles and topics we've covered over this first season of Rebuilding the Black Family?
Beautifully said, Carl. Yeah, let's do a recap of what we've discussed during the season. So I just have it listed here. So we started off with the first episode focusing on looking at the beauty of being Black and really challenging our viewers as well as one another of how long we could go just saying or just uttering affirmations, positive affirmations about one another, about us as Black people, whether it starts with us individually and then transcends to our greater collective, right? So that was the first episode. We talked about then on the flip side of talking about mental health, right? And talking about schizophrenia specifically. I came in and gave an understanding of schizophrenia, a mental illness in our community. So for those who haven't checked it out, be sure to check it out. It may help you or even a loved one. We talked about fighting against self-hatred, right? Which is to talk about the ramification, the consequences of racism and just the overall anti-African or anti-Black sentiments, attitudes, and racist policies and behaviors that unfortunately affect our people worldwide on a very psychological and profoundly, essentially spiritual level. We talked about Black maternal health. We had our beautiful guest, Priscilla Babua, who's a perinatal social worker working out of the Taibu Community Health Center in Scarborough, Ontario. Give her overview of her experience working with Black mothers who, and helping to cater to their well-being. She specifically talked about the importance of recognizing the illness, postpartum depression, right? I think it was wonderful she brought that up. We talked about the true colors of the pandemic. And essentially we were talking about the controversy with the vaccine mandates as well as the COVID virus, as well as the racism that was further magnified during the pandemic, and how, the world was forced to recognize that anti-Black racism is alive and well. We talked about the miseducation of racism, which I think, went hand in hand, just really trying to re-educate our viewers and listeners on what racism is and what it essentially means for our livelihood, for our community, and how do we fight against it, and how do we better understand it. We talked about reconciling the rift between Black men and women. We had our wonderful guest, Larecia Williams, who is a psychotherapist in private practice, as well as a child welfare social worker. And she gave her overview, her experience on working with Black men and Black women from a psychological lens, and really trying to understand the historical antecedents leading to the rift between Black men and Black women, but also how we rectify that, how we, as I said in the title, reconcile those differences, those challenges.
And I thought that was a really respectful conversation, and discussion that you had. That really,
I agree.
At its heart, at the best interest.
Yes.
Of both Black men and women.
Excellent. I think I agree. It was a very balanced conversation. I think, her and I were able to balance out the different genders.
Of course.
To a level that I think both genders were able to, I guess, be done justice. You gave us a beautiful, informative, and inspiring overview of, or informative lecture on why God is Black is not only a controversial title, but is an empowering title, is an empowering phrase. And you gave an understanding, a profound understanding of the whitewashing of the Christian religion, which actually has roots, is rooted in Africa, and how it's predominantly been based off of the global majority, Black, brown, and yellow people, and how it was kiboshed by those of, European descent. And you essentially just really helped Black people to understand that you are not eternally doomed, that your life is not endowed with simply suffering, and that it is God's will that you suffer, right? You gave a beautiful overview of that. So thank you for that, Brother Carl. We talked about the importance of entrepreneurship. We had the, wonderful business lawyer, Courtney Fraser, who came and gave a beautiful understanding of why it's important to go into entrepreneurship, the pros and cons of it. He talked about business contracts, and as well as how Black people can begin diversifying where they invest their time in terms of what businesses they are to start, and the importance of filling voids. We are ending, with the last guest, Eshe Simba, who gives us a very beautiful overview of Black wealth and how to create it, and her experience as a both financial advisor as well as life insurance agent, as well as the founder of Sugar Plum Scrubs. She gives a really nice overview of tangible takeaways or practical tips for Black people in terms of managing money, in terms of understanding the different insurance plans. And here we are now, ending off with all these beautiful, diverse topics and speaking about the importance of Black unity, which I think is essentially just trying to piece everything together to talk about how this creates a functioning, cohesive, and comprehensive Black community. So that is the overview.
Fantastic.
I think it was some great topics and great conversations.
And, as you were talking there, I thought about this, David, that anytime, let's say this emphasis on the Black community, Black families, Black nation, and sometimes some maybe new viewers, because we get new viewers all the time, why the emphasis on Black? Let me address that again. As you're talking, oftentimes if something has been if you've gone to an extreme in one end,
yes,
to balance it out, you have to go almost to an extreme in another end.
Excellent.
To balance it out.
It's true.
And so when we're doing this emphasis, because of the subjugation of Black people, and by that the subjugation of even our thinking, our mentality,
yes,
sometimes that's led to self-abasement, and we address some of that.
Yes.
Then we're going, on really, in some cases, some people might say it's an extreme. We don't see it that way.
Agreed.
But it's all for the purpose of establishing a healthy, positive mentality about Black people, who we are, our heritage, so we're not ashamed of who we are, not ashamed of our roots, our heritage, not ashamed of being identified with Africa.
Yes.
Because, again, someone said, if you don't know your roots, Right? You've got to know your roots. You've got to know who you are.
Yes.
And so let's get to this today then, David. Let's talk about, well, why is black unity so important?
Excellent.
Let's talk there before my part to it, but go ahead.
So why is black unity so important? The best way I can sum it up, I have a good friend of mine who is now a police officer for the Cornwall Police, Raheem Aman. Him and I were having a conversation. Shout out to Raheem Aman. He used to be in the military, and he spoke about the major premise or the major objective in the military is to move as one. And he said, if nothing else, if you cannot move as one, all skills and everything else becomes obsolete. And this is coming from somebody who's been in the military.
Excellent.
And he was in operations, right? So he understood what it meant to have a successful military regime. And that was essentially what he said when it came to the importance of, because him and I have had these conversations, why black unity is important is because when you move as one, you're unstoppable, right? So when we think of black unity, it's moving as one. Moving as one doesn't mean you fully agree with one another. You go in the military, they probably don't fully agree with one another, right? When we look at World War II, Canada, Russia, Poland, all the different countries that fought against the Germans.
Yeah, the Allies. Yeah.
The Allies probably didn't agree with one another, but they moved as one. Hence why they were successful in defeating the Germans. When we as black people understand that despite our differences, despite our various backgrounds, when we understand fundamentally we are fighting the same enemy, we can begin to understand the importance of moving as one.
Very good.
Being unified. So that's when I think of black unity. That's what I think of. And the last piece, just to add another analogy, I remember in a Malcolm X speech, he talked about how if somebody slaps you with an open hand, and I may be paraphrasing, slaps you with an open hand, it may sting you for that moment. But because the fingers are disunified, it's not going to be as effective. But the minute you close up that all those fingers, and they unify into one big ball of a fist, and you connect with that person, the impact is so tremendous. And that analogy stuck with me because when you think about the importance of unity, it's not this far-fetched idea. It's a practical understanding, especially when you base it off of that military analogy that I put.
Excellent.
That's also what I think of when I think of black unity and the importance of it.
So like the slap when you said like this.
Yes, the open hand.
So it's 5. I'm just 5 versus 1 together.
Excellent.
And I thought of this then before you continue. You cannot build anything successfully or effectively without unity.
Say it again.
And in fact, in Amos 3 verse 8, it says, how can two walk together unless they be in agreement? Think about that. And it says, if, and even in a scriptural prayer, it says, if 2 of you or 3 agree on earth concerning anything, they shall ask of my Father, it shall be done. Power of agreement. Oh, by the way, the first kingdom, which was Nimrod, he was black, by the way. First kingdom, first recorded kingdom in the Bible, Babel. And when we get the Tower of Babel, God says this. Think about this. When they were building a tower, and the language says they're building it up to heaven.
Yes.
That's what the objective was. It says, the people are as one, and nothing can stop them. Think about that.
Yeah.
So God was actually saying, listen, I can't even stop them because of their unity.
That's how powerful it is when you move as one.
That's how powerful unity is.
Yes.
And their work, they only went when it stopped when their languages were changed. They couldn't communicate as one, right?
Exactly.
So the power of unity. So that's what we want to focus on in our time remaining. So let's talk a little bit then, David. What are the things then Since unity is so important, and I
Yes.
love the your military friends analogy.
Yes.
Think about that. I mean, nothing is going to get done without unity. We're going
Nothing at
nowhere
all.
without it.
Exactly.
So it's a great way to tie our season up. So what are the things we must do then in order to promote our unity and hence maximize our objective? Because again, our objective is building strong, productive, successful, self-sustainable or sustainable black families, black communities where we're really growing and strong and powerful. So, I believe there are things we must agree on. We must come together on in order to really walk in this kind of unity. Let's talk about that.
Excellent. So, what I would say when it comes to black unity, when it comes to anything in our community, but especially when it comes to black unity and trying to, I guess you could say, systemize or make it practical and have it in a structure, there has to be some, I guess you could call it code of conduct.
Good, a code of
right?
conduct. Yeah.
As we know, in anything, right? You go to a workplace, you go to a sport, you're on a sports team, even in prison, right? Anywhere you go, there is a code of conduct, and it's a fact, right? I've had friends, I've had clients who've been in prison. They'll tell me, you come into the range. This is not just free for all.
Yeah.
You go to the wall, and there's a code of conduct, rules in place. Our lives are structured off of rules and codes that you have to adhere to. We, as black people, as diverse as we are, we don't have even a fundamental level or a fundamental code of conduct that we can adhere to, especially in Canada. Some would say, well, how is that even possible? How could we even create that? We did it during slavery. That goes to my next piece. When we analyze how we can gain this level of unity, we have to analyze our history. I feel like in our community, sometimes there is a struggle, an imbalance of being present in reality, but also understanding and internalizing our historical antecedents. There is an imbalance. There are some people who are too much in history and don't want to be present in reality. They're too much about analyzing what we used to be, rather than looking at our current condition and how we can strive to be like how we were before, but maybe even better in a different way. Then there's people who are too much in reality and don't want to look at the historical antecedents that have caused or influenced the conditions in which we are currently. And what I always try to strive to be is to be center and have a balance. So when we look at what does that mean for unity, I look at, well, we couldn't have always been as disorganized as some aspects of a community are to this day. We couldn't have got out of slavery without unity. We couldn't have got out of colonialism without unity. We couldn't have got out of segregation or any of that without unity. And when you study history, and you look at when they just got off the boat as an example, they came from a plethora of different African respective cultures, right? Some were Temne, some were Akan, some were Yoruba, some were Igbo, throughout, right? Some spoke Lingala, some spoke Ashanti, some spoke Tree, all of that. But you know what they did? They said, okay, we're all enslaved. I don't really understand you. You don't really understand me. But Massa doesn't understand any of us. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to create a unifying language called Creole in Haiti, or Patois, right? Or West African Pidgin. We're going to create a unifying language, and we're going to adhere to speaking this language amongst us. That's a code of conduct. When you're around one another, you speak in that language. When you're around Massa, you speak in his language. When we are in this respective environment, this is how we're going to marry. When our children come into place, this is what we're going to do. We can't adhere to our respective customs that we are back home because we've been dislocated. So this is the new code of conduct we're going to create. And I could go on. My point is we created, despite our differences
and
the circumstances, we created codes of conduct. Have we done that in today's realm? No, because we say, well, I can't do that because I'm Christian. Well, I can't do it because I'm Muslim. Well, I can't do that because I'm conservative. Well, I can't do that because I'm liberal. So I don't mess with those type of black people. But then when it comes to racism, we're all the same victim. whether you're liberal, conservative, whether you're Rasta, whether you're Pentecostal, whether you're Baptist, whether you're educated, uneducated, racism affects us equally. And until we recognize that, we will continue to be scatterplot. But the minute we come together and say, despite all those differences, just like despite our linguistic differences back in those respective places, our geographical differences, we need to create a universal understanding of trying to codify and structure what our behavior looks like. So this is what I mean when we understand history, we understand reality, we have to take some of those themes and apply it to our present time so that we can see that it's not impractical and it's not even that far-fetched of a reality. This is what our ancestors did.
So you're not stuck in the past.
Yes.
You're
not stuck in it.
Like you said, some people are stuck in the past.
Yeah.
So they almost memorialize the past.
Very good. It's all about nostalgia.
And so we are learning from the past. We learn the lessons from the past and live in the future and live in the present, to make a better future. And so instead of living or being locked in the past and almost mourning our present existence because we're looking, the past was almost the ideal.
Yes.
We say, no, that was good, what they realized and what they came out of.
Yes.
But we realize, no, we've got our own dreams.
Yes.
For not only our own present and our future.
Yes.
But we look back and say, well, what can we take? What lessons did they pass on? So that we can dream our dreams and create our future. So let's talk about this. This mutually accepted or acceptable code of conduct.
Yes.
So let's go through that.
Okay.
Sometimes I like lists because it's there in front of us. Like you said, when you go into an organization, you see the vision, mission, the code of conduct or the culture, the values.
Very good.
And so let's talk about, I think this code of conduct, there are things we value.
Yes.
There are things that are very important to our existence.
That's exactly what a code
There are
of conduct
things
is.
that pull us together and say, you know what? We value where we're going so much. We value so much this dream, this passion we have to build strong black families, strong black communities.
Yes.
We want it to be successful and sustainable. We don't just want it to be good just for a season.
No.
We want this to get bigger and better.
We want
and
longevity.
Strong longevity.
Yes.
We want it. And so let's talk about this list. Let's say number one. Let's
number one. And I think, and this list is simply our opinion, or even my opinion, or our opinion, just as examples. And I really want the viewers and the listeners to understand that it's not about creating your own sort of list. Maybe you can create your own list for yourself, but what I'm trying to help us to understand is this can help possibly be a segue into a widespread conversation about what we as Black people, as African people, are going to do in our respective circles that are fundamentally similar. So when we look at what could be a code of conduct list for Black people in Canada, first and foremost, because we have a different context than our Black brethren and sisterin in the States, we shall recognize our nationalities in conjunction with, rather than in absence of, our African heritage.
Very good.
What I mean by that, you probably know where I'm going. We have no issue with you saying, well, I'm Trini, I'm Jamaican, I'm Nigerian, I'm from, I'm Sierra Leone, whichever. So long as you're not rejecting your African heritage in the process, that you are not trying to hold on to this nationality as if it came about without your African heritage right alongside it.
So you recognize the unified root, or the singular root.
The singular root.
See
that's
that?
Exactly it.
So I love that point one.
Yes, and that's point one. I think that should be echoed throughout our respect in whatever respective sphere, right? I love being Jamaican, but I love being African, Jamaican African, right? Recognizing that there would be no Jamaica without first being African.
Very good.
As an example, right? Second one is we will prioritize doing business with one another. And it's important because this is not to say that we don't do business with other communities.
No, it's not saying.
Right? We're not saying that. We are simply saying your priority is with your community. I know many other cultures that do business with other communities, but not before they first consult with their own community.
Exactly.
But also in that same breath, and this is what we talked about in that episode with Brother Courtney Frazier, we as Black people need to start populating other realms so that we don't have to go to other communities for those businesses. If we oversaturate certain fields, it's going to be very difficult for me or anybody to remain committed to finding a Black person in this field if there's very few of us to begin with. And those very few are over capacity, right? So while we want to prioritize doing business with one another, we also want to prioritize entering into different fields that meet the various needs of our community.
Very good. That's well stated.
Thank you.
That's very well
Right?
stated. So again, we got to underscore. I think it
Have to.
also speaks to a positive mentality
Excellent.
we have about one another in business.
Yes.
That we're not defaulting, well, he's Black and so he doesn't have the high standards. It's not going to be as good quality.
That's
so
it.
we don't default to that anymore. But by having that mentality, David, we're also making a certain demand of one another. That we are producing
Expectation, very good.
Yes, so we're producing the very best.
Yes.
That let's say you're a Black consumer, but you're expecting the best from me as a Black businessman.
Very good.
And I'm going to produce the very best because of the way I think about you. You deserve the best.
It has to be reciprocal. And
Yes.
I'm so happy you brought that point, because when you have that reciprocal relationship, that the Black consumers presuming that you're going to, or should presume that you're going to give them the best service, the best product.
Exactly.
The Black service provider should also expect that you are going to be a loyal customer.
Exactly.
And that you're going to treat them with the highest respect and not have low expectations for what they can or can't provide.
Excellent. Number 3.
Number 3, we will prioritize, and this is a big one, marrying, loving, and caring for one another. And the reason I emphasize that is there's no issue in terms of on the flip side, there may be an issue in terms of who you want to or not want to marry, care for, love, whomever. But we have to understand that the greatest commitment to our community is marriage and procreation, if possible, right? And the reason I emphasize that is because we know systematically that was the major institution that was decimated, or at least attempted to be decimated, through colonialism and through enslavement, and even in some cases through segregation in terms of little subtleties. So when we say the importance of wanting to prioritize and not look down upon those who are in our community in terms of who you want to give your love to, who you want to procreate with, etc., it's in reference, it's in reminder that this was an institution that was attacked so aggressively. So the fact that it was attacked so aggressively has to make us think, well, there must be some power in it.
And also then, if in the way you're looking at it, I can't help but think it's a reflection of how we see one another. Remember in part of I think the first episode,
Yep.
we talked about Black is beautiful.
Yeah, exactly.
And so seeing one another, you're not just good enough for me to play around with. No, you're
Very good.
beautiful and good enough for me to marry,
To commit.
to commit to.
Very good. To be devoted to.
To be devoted to. So those again, and that's a huge building block for our community, where we have good, faithful men and women
Excellent.
committed to one another in a
Yes.
marriage relationship, which also provides a loving environment and an atmosphere for our children to come in,
That's beautiful.
which provides the security they
Exactly.
need, the example, the valuing that they so need.
That's exactly it.
And of course that long-term security. You know, it creates an environment that helps them to think good about themselves.
Exactly.
They're being invested in,
Yes.
they're being loved, they're
Exactly.
being educated, they're being trained. And then, of course, if they see us relating to one another in a marriage relationship in a good, faithful manner, they'll want to perpetuate the same thing.
And you create a healthy cycle.
Yes.
You create a very healthy cycle. Very
Excellent.
good.
Excellent. Number 4.
Number 4, when one of
Oh,
us
I wanted to
wins-
say that one. Man, I wanted to say it. Oh, no.
Okay, go ahead.
When one of us wins, we celebrate. When one of us loses, we mourn. Man, that's a beautiful one. Let me say it again.
Yes, say it again, please.
When one of us wins, we will celebrate.
Yes.
I love that. When one of us loses, we will mourn. I just love that, David, because it speaks to that I want you to succeed.
Yep.
And you've got to succeed.
How-
And so that's what we're putting in.
Yes.
We're saying, David, we can't afford for you to lose.
Yes.
You've got to win. I love that, because then if imagine a community of people knowing that we're not building on the failure of others.
No.
No. You've got to succeed because your success is my success.
Yes.
And then what it tells us is this: if you lose, no, it's temporary. We're gonna pick you back up. We're gonna do whatever it takes
Yes.
to help you to win.
Excellent.
I just love that. Anyway, I just
No,
love that number.
It's one of
4.
my
Just
favorite as
excellent.
well. It's one of my
Excellent.
favorite as well.
Excellent.
Number five. Our different economic, political, educational, religious, and otherwise will not supersede our fundamentally similar African heritage. And what I mean by that is, as I alluded to earlier, regardless of our respective differences in the different realms of our life, it doesn't take away from the fact that you're of African heritage, that you are African. Some would say, well, why is that relevant? Why that relation means nothing to me, because if we think differently, then that makes no sense. But when we think again from a military standpoint, when the enemy can pick on those divisive points, that's how they overtake you. You don't have to like that other black person. Matter of fact, you don't even have to want to be around them per se. That may be an individual black person. But if you can understand that they're in the same fight as you, and that they oppress in the same way as you are, even if it's superficially, you have at least a form of respect for one another. Say, you know what? You may you may vote conservative. You may have liked the fact that Trump was in office in the States, or you may have liked Stephen Harper. And I like Justin Trudeau, not me personally, but that person.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah.
But you know what? They will say, but I can respect the fact that you're a black person. I'm a black person. We have the same enemy. Let's at least try to find some way we can find similarities to unite on, right? That is a level of maturity that's unmatched.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we have to be best friends, but it's when you see one another, you see that person. So you see them, you give them a head nod. I'm not really a fan of you, but I respect you enough that on the outside looking in, they're not going to know.
No, in addition to that, or complementing that, what I see, though, is that our objective is to build one another. See, we're building something. We're building families. We're building a community.
Very good.
We're building, we could say, a nation, if you will.
Yes.
And so we're not allowing anything to divide us,
Nothing.
because we're seeing a singular objective.
Yes.
And then it reminds me of what's interesting. Many people sometimes lose sight of this. When Jesus gave the Great Commission, I think it's interesting, he said, go into all the world and preach the gospel to all nations.
Yes.
See? So that means he recognized nations.
Yes.
Think about this, and their
Yes.
boundaries. Now, another scripture in Acts chapter 17, I think it was Paul speaking. He says, God made from one blood, or one man, all nations. And he says, and he has given them their respective boundaries. Isn't that interesting?
Wow, that's very interesting.
So now when we're talking, when we mention that, that's what we're respecting. We're respecting the uniqueness of one another.
Yes.
We're not using that to divide us.
No.
But let's say on this African heritage, mandate, if you will, we're saying, you know what? We're not going to allow peripheral issues, and many of them very important. We're not allowing that to cause us to demonize, to put down
Exactly.
our African heritage. We're going to do
Exactly.
whatever it takes to build. And again, when we do that, David, we're building people. See that? We're building families. We're building communities.
Yep.
We're building nations. We could
That's
say
it.
nations within that continent. I'm just saying,
That's
if we
it.
go
No,
back to that.
That's it.
And so
That's it.
that's number 5.
That was number 5.
Number
6. The delivery and formulation
like
of
this
the
one.
education of our children shall not be in any other community's hands but our own.
So again, that's personal responsibility.
Personal
That's what
responsibility.
I hear.
It is non-negotiable. There is no justification in the world as to why we are reliant on any other community but our own to educate and grow and turn into responsible peoples in our respective communities. For that responsibility to be in the hands of anybody else who's not black.
Let me give an example. Just might fit in there.
Yes.
I don't think I've shared this with you. When we came to this country, and a couple of years later, I was going into grade 9.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I'm not sure how it is now, they had 2 levels. You had advanced and general.
Okay, now it's academic, applied, or vocational.
Okay, so there are 3 levels. Back then it was 2 levels.
Yeah, but actually I think they
I'm
may have
dating
taken away the
myself. So
stream.
anyway, so now
Yes.
if you went into the general level, doesn't mean you're less smart, but then you'd be streamed into a
yes.
certain level. You
Yes.
could maybe get into college, but you'd have to go into applied or trades or
Yes.
different other things. And nothing wrong with any profession. Don't
No.
get me wrong.
No.
But if you wouldn't be allowed to go into university because you wouldn't have taken the necessary courses.
Yes.
So, grade 9, guidance counselor says to me, remember, doesn't really know me, says to me, you need to take general courses. Now, at that time, and up until even more recently in my work with people in the black community, many black people were told the same thing.
Yep.
We're told, you know what, you can't handle that level of instruction.
Yes. You don't have the analytical capacity.
You don't have that.
Yep.
Remember, they told me that.
Yep.
Now, somehow, even without my parents knowing, I said, no, I'm going to take academic courses.
Yes.
Now, how many black people, black young people, young men and women, bright, inventive, creative, their future was stymied or limited because someone else
That's it.
took charge of their educational potential.
That's exactly
So
it.
that's what this is when we say the delivery and formulation of the education of our children shall not be in any other community's hands but our own.
And to even add to that, this is why it's important in order to avoid detriments like that, why we need to work towards creating not only our own curriculum, but creating our own institution, whether that looks like in a building form or something that's structured and systemized, because that is the future of our children. We cannot talk about freedom for black people, but don't want to leave, but we don't want to relinquish the white man's curriculum. It's an absolute contradiction. I'm not saying we can't make adjustments in the interim, but because that's all about the truth.
Have feedback and input into it.
Yes. As well as you concurrently are trying to create and manifest your own.
Exactly.
That's
I need to say this too, though.
Yes.
Because to do justice, right now where many of you live, of our listeners live, it's making sure as parents you're fully engaged in your children's education. I've got to say this. I was asked to be part of a parenting deal in helping parents in a certain school. It's a school of, we're talking of maybe a couple thousand. On parent-teacher night, there wasn't even a score of parents showing up. So I'm just saying,
It's heartbreaking.
We've got to be fully engaged. No matter if we're working 2 jobs, I know you're doing your best, but you've got to do whatever it takes
to prioritize your children's education.
And you can't find out, I'm saying this, you can't find out in June that your child has failed.
No.
When they were failing from January.
Thank you.
And I've seen that.
Yep.
30%. Someone said 30%. They were getting 30%. I said, how could that happen? And you're living with your parents.
Yep.
You've got to be fully engaged. Sorry,
no problem.
We had to say that.
100%. And last 2, because I know we have
Number
to wrap
7,
up soon. Number 7, we shall practice unconditional love
Excellent.
towards members in our community. And I quickly just want to say, it goes to addressing some of the earlier points about our differences and things along those lines. and even when it comes to doing business with one another, this is not to say we're not going to mess up. We're going to make mistakes. Yeah. We're going to have differing arguments. But you have to have the same level of unconditional love that you'll have for that boss who will disrespect you from morning till night, yet you'll work at that company for 30 years, 15 years, 20 years. You will have that teacher disrespect you, that principal disrespect you, and you'll tolerate it for all 4 years of high school or all 12 years of elementary. But the minute one black person says something that you don't like, all of a sudden, you're wiping your hands of them clean. Not okay. We need to recognize that that is not okay. We need to start having some unconditional love for our people.
I love that.
The last one, which I think helps to fill in this gap of what happens if you are disrespected beyond human comprehension, beyond, I should say, reconciliation. We shall carry forth sanctioned consequences for those who, in any way, shape, or form, violate the lives of the members of our community. This is not just solely those on the outside of our community. This is also within. We have to understand that in order to create strong, healthy black families, we have to understand there are people who are unwell. They're going to do things that maybe they would not have done in their right mind, and we need to treat them. But there needs to be consequences. And then there's others, unfortunately, who may be malicious. There's others who may have been predatory, who may want to exploit members of our community because unfortunately they've become so backwards and degenerate in a sense that they're no longer of use to us. This happens in any community, right? When we look at the Chinese Cultural Revolution, they got rid of a lot of members of their community who were so backwards because of their adherence to the British, right? That was in the Chinese culture. Similar thing happened in the in Indian cultures, right? Similar thing happened in Pakistan cultures, right? Same thing happened in various indigenous cultures where you have people in your community that unfortunately become of no use because they are so backwards, so vile that you can't even now fathom their behavior. You have to remove them.
So detrimental.
To the
objective of our community.
To the objective of our community, you have to remove them. There has to be some sort of sanctioned consequences. Back to the unity, the understanding that we are not going to tolerate this. This doesn't mean, this goes back to the unconditional piece. We recognize when it's malicious or when it is simply a teachable moment. But we also recognize there's certain rules and conditions that need to be adhered to. And if you don't,
and that's really part of self-governance again.
Very good. In conclusion, essentially.
Yeah.
So those are examples of a code of conduct to try to structure our community. Are there some that we may have missed? Can you think of what that would look like in your everyday life?
That is excellent.
This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to rebuild strong, cohesive black communities. And so, Carl, close us out. I think that's a beautiful way to end our season.
Excellent. So as we close out our first season of Rebuilding the Black Family, we want to say thank you so much for your attention, for you even tuning in for every podcast, also sharing it, liking it, our content, subscribing to our podcast. We want to thank you for just being so engaged in the comments, the feedback you've given. And we trust that you've been informed, enlightened, and inspired by every episode. And as we begin to even prepare for season number 2, we welcome your thoughts. We welcome your comments. We welcome maybe suggestions, recommendations for maybe program topics you'd like us to discuss and address. And David, it's been a real pleasure and a real pleasure to do this. And again, we're really looking forward to season 2.
Yes.
And remember, as I always say, it is the truth that makes us free. So we're signing off for season 1. We look forward to seeing you in season 2.